I went through quite a life change, and that softened me a lot. And I ended up having to do a lot of work on myself and all of that. And this much softer version of myself appeared, which was like, hey, you don't have to know everything. You don't have to have all the answers. You can ask for help. You can be vulnerable, you know? And I was like, shit, that would have served me very well years ago, and more served me from like my own mental health and like anguish, to your point of like feeling like I had to be this certain way. And I would make a lot of people suffer. And there was I brought in a lot of pain when now I would do differently.
Hi, I'm Derik Mills. Welcome to the Glow Podcast. This week on our podcast, I share my conversation with the founder of Drybar and serial entrepreneur, Alli Webb. Her success is a testament to her following her heart, listening to her intuition, asking for help when she needed it, and choosing paths that, though difficult and challenging, led to healing and growth. We explore all of that in this episode. Alli makes it clear that while there's no one pathway to success, there is inner work that all entrepreneurs and leaders and managers must do. If you try to skip that work, as some version of success comes or doesn't, you may be unprepared for what could follow next. We talk about hiring and team culture, starting new ventures, and the positive impact that coaching can have on founders and managers who might otherwise avoid the tough conversations they need to have. I hope you enjoy my conversation with Alli Webb. Hi, Alli. So wonderful to be here with you today.
Thanks for having me.
So I have two Drybar stories that I want to share with you to kick this off.
Oh, good.
All right. So the first time I saw one, I was with my wife. I don't recall if we were in Manhattan Beach or Brentwood. Was Manhattan Beach an early location?
Brentwood was the first location. Manhattan Beach was like not early, probably a couple years in.
Okay. So maybe it was Brentwood, possibly.
Probably.
And I could see it just buzzing inside with activity. And I was with my wife, like I mentioned, and it was her first time seeing one as well. And she said, wow, that is so genius. But she did have to explain to me why it was a genius idea. I'm someone who I think probably for 15 years cut my own hair with the buzzer, with the clippers, and number 6 on top. Mm-hmm. And when she did, it completely made sense to me as to why it was and is so genius. The other story is we were once in San Francisco, my wife and I, and we got invited for a conference, and we got invited to a last minute event. And, a whole day at a conference, tired, dirty, not wanting to just want to go back to the room and do nothing. Within minutes, she found a Drybar, and the words, hopped in taxi, went and came back, and the words she used just saved her. So
I love that. Well, it's interesting. I mean, now, as a guy, which a lot of guys do need to have it explained to them. And now, and usually it is by like a wife or daughter or sister. And now that you understand it, I know that feeling because, it does. And a lot of women say that like it saved me because I had to go to this event and I didn't have time and I needed to look a certain way. It's also, which she may or may not have told you, is like, it's really relaxing and like rejuvenating. It's similar to like getting a massage, which, of course we'll hit on that later, but it is like you get to like decompress for an hour. Someone washes your hair, which, even though you've been cutting your own hair, like when you get your hair washed by somebody else. And again, as a guy, you've not really experienced this, but the actual act of getting someone to blow out your hair, it feels really good. The ambient noise of the blow dryer is relaxing. You've heard, I'm sure that, it's something that moms use for babies too, to calm them down and get them to sleep. So that's the thing about Drybar. Listen, I wish I could tell you I mapped that all out and I knew about, I knew those things peripherally on some level, but it's all of that stuff coming together. And then at the end, she walks out, she feels amazing, she looks amazing, which makes her feel amazing. Plus she just spent an hour totally decompressing, relaxing, probably, watching the movie or just tuning out the world and not talking to anybody, and that, all of that is the magic, that is the reason that Drybar became so successful, not to mention the branding and the atmosphere and the price point and all of those things too. But there's so much about that moment that she experienced and explained to you, that is why, Drybar became so successful. So I love those stories.
That's critical because
Yeah.
so much of what I think we'll get into today and the success of Drybar and it seems everything you touch thereafter also has to do with these intangible, intuitive feeling moments of there's something larger here, there's something more going on, there's something more holistic.
Yeah.
I maybe can't put it all to words, but I know it feels good for me.
Yeah.
And so then maybe it might feel good for a lot of other people. And yeah, sure enough, science tends to follow a lot of these kind of more intuitive sensing ways of going through the world that ultimately are very therapeutic.
Yeah. I mean, it's so true. And I think that's like always been kind of my guiding light, is just like, I grew up with entrepreneurial parents, who there was such a focus for them on customer service and the way you made people feel. And that was in, a very different kind of environment. They were selling clothes. However, they had a very genius idea ahead of their time as well, which, I grew up in South Florida, and, they had these little clothing boutiques that were catered towards like older women, like grandmother's age. And most grandmothers would only shop at could only shop at like the mall. That was all that was available to them. And that was a tough thing for them to get to and whatever. And my parents opened up what was called flips in these little shopping centers, where the trolley would take them over from the retirement center and drop them off. And there's the bagel shop and the dry cleaner and the bank and the Chinese restaurant. And then my parents opened, and the hair salon, and my parents opened flips, which is like discount clothing stores. And my dad used to set up used to bring the men bagels and orange juice in the newspaper, and then have like a row of chairs sitting so the wives could shop. And if the men were happy, the wives could shop longer and they were just more at ease. And so, I learned I've experienced that. I wasn't paying attention when I was young, but I know so much of that was like ingrained in me, of like the way you make people feel. And it was, in that case, it was like my mom, my mom also had this, she was such a martyr and would like bend over backwards for customers. And they were, grumpy. I mean, they were like older, and you know how people, it's just like, we get older, we get grumpier,
Sure.
and my mom, I would watch my mom be so incredibly kind to these women who weren't all that nice to her all the time. And my dad bent over backwards for the husbands. And it was like, wow, it's like they were making people feel really good. And I think that's been so ingrained in me. And so when I went out into the world, I moved to New York City when I was in my 20s, and I always experience businesses differently, I think, than probably most people, where like I immediately was like annoyed when people weren't treating me a certain way. I was immediately frustrated if it was dirty or the music was right. It was like, it's almost like a sensory overload to me. I mean, it's like a blessing and a curse, because I walk in a place and I'm just like nitpicking the shit out of it, because it's just how I was raised and what's in my blood, and so Drybar and now all these and all the other things I do just come from that same like desire for things to be a certain way. I don't always nail it, and I miss the mark plenty, but that is kind of the driving force, I think, which was like, I owe so much to my parents for like instilling that in me.
What a wonderful gift from your parents. Customer experience is critical. That makes me think of how I was our only customer support agent for the first 4 years of Glow, from the end of 2008 to the end of 2012, mainly because we are self-funded and I couldn't afford to hire a team at that time. And it wasn't until we had other teams up and running that we started to hire for customer experience. And I also wanted it done in a certain way, which also speaks to what you had referred to, the sometimes intangible, intuitive sense you have about how you want key experiences for your customers to flow in a specific way. There are other aspects of Glow that are intuitively felt non-negotiables for us, but that's perhaps a topic for another time. And I'm fascinated with how companies scale brand DNA as a team grows. There are certainly functional and dysfunctional ways to do that, like you mentioned. What I really appreciate and respect about your background story is that it sounds like you were less interested in pursuing someone else's idea or society's idea of how your life should unfold, but rather you were following your heart, sort of per what we were just discussing. And you listen to those inner voices, you ask for help, you seem to choose paths and experiences that, though difficult and sometimes painful, they seem to lead to learning and growth, all of which seems to also allow you to create the conditions to pursue something that and create something that is unique to you. And I haven't heard you say these words exactly, but I hear kind of an underlying thread or a foundational message of like, do the hard work to be you, be yourself, do you. The world doesn't need more of someone else. The world needs more of you. And so I was thinking 2 questions to kind of kick us off. Number 1, is that correct? And number 2, if yes, I'm wondering, like, can we frame part of your background story, up to starting Drybar through that lens of being on this path of constant self-discovery and self-expression?
Yeah. And I think that is true. And I don't think I've ever said it quite like that either, but I think that is a pretty good framing of it because, I really was very kind of lost out of high school. And, I was so confused about how my friends knew what they wanted to do with their lives. And I didn't. And I was like, I had thought about doing hair. I'd thought about going into fashion, and I felt it was a really scary kind of feeling. It was like, oh shit, what am I going to do? I didn't have very good grades, so I wasn't like a scholar. I wasn't I was an athlete, but not like, I wasn't going anywhere with that. I did want to be a professional tennis player and was pretty good for a while, but that's another story. But yeah, so it was like, okay, I think I just need to, I just kept kind of, I definitely couldn't have said this back then, but I think what I did intuitively was I kept doing the things that I like doing. I'm such a if I don't want to do something, it's really hard for me to do it. I'm sure a lot of people are like that, but so I was like, I'm going to just keep, but I also was driven and ambitious in my own right. So I was like, I'm just going to keep doing the things that I like doing, and I'm going to keep finding things that I like doing. And I was all over the place. I really did think I was going to be a professional tennis player. I had that dream for a while, and until that dream faded away and became not a reality, and then my parents took us to New York City a lot when I was a kid, and I just was dying to go to New York City. I didn't know what I was going to do, but I knew I wanted to be in the city and I wanted that experience. I grew up in, South Florida, Boca Raton, and it was a great place to grow up, but I was like, I need a lot more than this. I got to get out. I want to be in a city. I want to be I was so enamored with New York and the magic of it and the opportunity that I could sniff, but I didn't know exactly what it meant to me. And so I think because of my parents' background, I decided to go into fashion, and that really was a jumping off point, and I had, and I really just did jump around from thing to thing, trying to figure out, thank you, what it was that made me tick, what it was that I liked. And I definitely kind of had a bad rap within my family and friends of oh, how people, if you look at someone's resume and they've been at a lot of different jobs, you're kind of there was this stigma around that, but I didn't really care. And I kind of just kept jumping from thing to thing. And it was so important as I look back, from deciding to work in fashion, and I worked at some really cool, I worked for Nicole Miller and Cynthia Raleigh, and that was really awesome. And then, and then I worked in PR for a while, and I had a dog walking business. I did all these random things. And so much of all of those businesses and those jobs prepared me, for who I ultimately became. It was working in PR was such a great, it was such a weird, side project or side thing, but it really, I had to sit at a cubicle and write emails, which I'd never done. And so I had to learn how to write professionally, which really was important, would serve me much later when I'm now running a big company, and learning how to deal with people and all of that. And all of the different things I did served me really well. So yes, I think that I'm a bit of a poster child for do the thing that makes you happy, because that thing will ultimately lead you to do more things that make you happy and make you, and that was really how I addressed my 20s. And I was really lucky that I had parents who were very supportive. My parents, supported me somewhat when I lived in New York, but barely. And I was like, living in a teeny tiny shitty apartment, but nobody cares when you're like in your 20s. And, so I definitely like followed that like intuition of what do I want to keep doing? And, and Drybar, leading up to Drybar was like, somewhere along that path in my 20s, I went to beauty school and then moved back to New York City and worked in hair salons and did all of that until I got married and had 2 kids and became a stay-at-home mom. And, the leading up to Drybar, I would never have guessed that any of the stuff I did would have mattered. It wasn't until we started Drybar and I was like, oh, that when I worked for the guy who owned John Peters in Boca Raton, I was able to draw on all that experience because he was the owner of the salon. So I knew things that I like didn't even know that I knew that were just back there in my brain. And I was able to draw so much of all the things I learned in my 20s by all these random jobs, which I feel like was my like college, all of those jobs and all of those experiences and things that I fucked up and things that I did well, all of that stuff so much like helped who I became, running Drybar. And so, I think that is the lesson here is like, you can do your own path. You can go your own way, whether it's college or not college. And I think it's cool now. I mean, it's ironic to me how much I get asked to speak at colleges because I didn't go to college, but so many colleges have these great entrepreneurship programs and like allowing students, people are writing papers about me all the time, which is such a it's so mind blowing to me. Because I'm like, it's really crazy to my family, because I wasn't a good student and college was not really ever a thing for me. But anyway, so yeah, I think that all of that stuff was like very uniquely prepared me for what, I ultimately would become my biggest success.
And that can be so scary because in those moments or in those years where you're working somewhere, it may not feel like 100% of a fit, but you're learning something and you're following some kind of path and you're taking a peek into some kind of world. And to be okay with the fact that may not make sense at the time.
I mean, one of my favorite things to say to people is trust your path. It's like, and there is something to be said for like, pay your dues, like do a shitty job for a while, just see what it's like. I mean, when we started Drybar, this is kind of another story, but it's like, even like I did everything. I did every job at Drybar. I cleaned the bathrooms, I cleaned toilets, I cleaned floorboards, I washed hair, I did everything. And when I worked in a hair salon, I did all of that stuff too. And I used to have to walk. I mean, I worked for this guy, John Sahag, who was very famous in the hair world. And he had these 2 massive greyhounds, big dogs. And he had a salon in Madison Avenue. And I used to have to walk those dogs to go to the bathroom on Madison Avenue. And you can do the math on how humbling that experience was. But it was like, I didn't like it at the time. And I was like, oh, I was so embarrassed having to pick up these like big piles of shit of these dogs. But that was like part of my job. And it was like all of that stuff that I did, to your point, I didn't love all of that at the time. And I wasn't like, you know what, this is going to be good for my future. Like, obviously I wasn't thinking any of that. But as I look back, but I think again, back to like my parents and what I wish for people now is like to have that, like, you pay your dues, you bend over backwards, you do shit you don't like to do. And all of that stuff builds character and makes you, a very well-rounded person. So again, I'm grateful that I had all those experiences.
I'm guessing people come to you for advice all the time asking, how do I start a business? And in my personal experience, there tends to be this desire to kind of jump over all of the whatever version of picking up someone else's dog's shit on a busy street while very fancy people in fancy clothes are passing you, and all the shame and whatever else comes with that. Do you see that this tendency to want to just short circuit all of that and get right to wealth, fame, etc. as quickly as possible?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think that there's this like run before you walk mentality that often, not always, I mean, I definitely like mentor some, founders who are starting businesses. And, I happen to be mentoring this girl right now. It's this really cool business called Braid Babes. And, and the part of the reason I enjoy mentoring her is because she worked so hard and she has the right attitude and the right skill set, to your point, where the people I'm not interested in working with are the people who just kind of want it handed to them and aren't willing to like, scrub the floors and do what needs to be done. And it was also, by the way, how I hired too, and how I continue to hire. It's like, I want somebody who will do whatever needs to be done. I was always that girl. Like, I would do any job, anytime, whether I was asked to, or just because I saw that somebody needed to be doing it, being that person who's like, I'm only doing the job I'm paid for. Mm-hmm. That's not part of what we talked about. Like, all that shit is like, it makes my skin crawl. And I experience that, there is a generation that has that mentality of like, I'm only going to do what you've paid me for and not one, second more. And and that just isn't, that's just not the way to success for me. And maybe it is for some people, but it's certainly not my formula.
And is there something you look for during the interview process to filter out for that?
Yeah, I think it's, anybody who I'm talking to for a job, it's like, I want that like undying passion. It's like, that to me speaks volumes of like, I am going to, get in there and do whatever it needs to be done. I'm going to work my ass off. I'm going to prove it to you. And, and those are the people I hire. I mean, I just hired, I guess it doesn't matter if I talk about it publicly. I recently hired, and she'd be a great interview for you too. Her name is Jessica Swag. We call her Jay-Z. And she has her own company called Simply Be. She just put out a great book, and she has like a branding agency. And she's been a big fan of mine for a long time. She had me on her podcast, and then I had her on my podcast, and she was explaining kind of what she does. And I was like, it's really interesting. I'm like, I kind of need that, and so we started talking, we kind of became friends. And so I recently hired her, and part of like, our courting process, and part of the reason that I hired her was because, she was like, I want to prove myself to you, cause like she's expensive. And I was like, of course I was negotiating as I do. And she's like, I'm going to prove myself to you, and I'm going to show you what I can do for you. And just had this, like, I will make it work, and I will show you that nobody's going to do this better, blah, blah, blah. It was just like, she really got me. You really understood, really listened to like what my needs were. And so all of those things are, on all different levels of hiring people, those are all the things that matter to me. It's like this, like, unwavering, excitement or belief in what you're interviewing for or about. And this, like, I will do whatever needs to be done to make this work. Cause I think at the end of the day, especially for like a startup, in the beginning of a business, it's like having people around you who have that mentality, which I very much experienced on Drybar, and who we hired, or the right hires that we made, were like, you just have to know that you're in an environment that's not a corporate environment, that we're like, the shit hits the fan. You might be doing something that you've never done before and you don't know how to do, but the fact that you're willing to do it makes all the difference to me. So that's really what I look for, more than experience or a resume or anything like that.
Yeah, that's powerful. Speaking of Jessica, yes, she's been on our podcast. That was episode 19. She was interviewed by my wife, Lisa, who, in addition to co-hosting Glow's podcast, is also Glow's Chief Impact Officer. And yes, we agree. Jessica is very inspiring.
She's awesome. Yeah, I love her. And I was so, she's such a breath of fresh air, and, it's been nothing, she's been so incredibly impressive to me. And, those are the people who become really successful.
For sure. Yeah, the magic does seem to happen when all of the different paths that one took seem to come together in a confluence that is directed towards something which is greater than oneself. And that's that kind of magic crucible within which, like, all the pieces and all the past is put in, it all gets cooked together, and something worthwhile comes out at the other end. And
it's really amazing. I'm such a big believer in that stuff.
As of today, your most recent post on your Instagram feed is you and your fiance, Adrian, who is a leadership coach, announcing the launch of Impact Series.
Yes.
Also, I've heard you say in other interviews that you could have used the type of coaching you've been experiencing recently 5 or 6 years ago. I forgot what time frame you said specifically. 2 questions. What is Impact Series and why has coaching been so helpful for you?
Well, Impact Series is basically this new kind of thing that we're trying because, Adrian, my fiance, he's a brilliant coach and leadership. We have to like sum his title down. So it's like leadership, business coach. But, one of the things that as I've gotten to know him and, and his ways and his style, it's like he coaches leaders, usually CEOs and founders of really amazing big companies. And it's what I've learned most from him is like, it's all very intertwined, the like business and personal, which I used to, and I've said in a gajillion interviews, it's not business. It's, it's not personal, it's business, which now I eat those words because what I've learned is like, what so much from him is like, whoever we are, whatever we're going through, we take to wherever we go, and sometimes that's, that is a reflection. If you're struggling at home, it's going to show up at work. And if you're struggling at work, it's going to show up at home. And, what's fascinating to me about the work that he does in the coaching is that it's not, I always thought like, oh, you're giving people advice and telling them what they should do. And he's like, no, I don't ever tell anybody what they should do.
Mm-hmm.
I help them figure out what they should do on their own, which was like, oh my God, and for me, like I've historically been like an avoider and in, I'm not in the day-to-day of Drybar the way I was, but in those earlier days, and I would say around year 4 or 5, we brought in a lot of money. We brought in a professional CEO. We started hiring these amazing executives. And I had never worked with people of that caliber. And it was like, I was like, really, I lost my footing in terms of like dealing with these types of people who were coming in to do a job and a job that they knew really well that I didn't, scaling a business, like we needed to become scalable. And Michael and I didn't know how to do that. But it was like the relationship I had with certain people who worked at our company who were great executives, but we didn't mesh. And I didn't know how to have like tough conversations with them. And I didn't know how to deal with the things that were bothering me. And I didn't know how to like approach all of that stuff. And so I just kind of was like, I was like mad about it. And I would bitch to my brother about it. And, when John Hefner came in, who was our CEO, and he was amazing, I would talk to him a lot about it, and it was like therapy sessions, and at that time I could have used, this is what I talk about a lot, is like, I could have used someone like Adrian. And I remember the idea getting floated, and I was very much in the camp of like, I don't want to coach. That's so stupid. I mean, because a lot of things like were like that for me back then, where I was like, it is this, like, I'm going to just like fake it until I make it. And it's like, I'm just going to, no, I don't need help. I had that mentality also, that this, like, I am not supposed to ask for help. I'm like the boss. This is my thing. And this is my idea. And I have to pretend like I know what I'm doing. All of that stuff was what I thought, and had I had known someone like Adrian, I probably would have like been able to walk some of that stuff out and have some of those tough conversations that I really frankly was avoiding, which wasn't helping anybody, so that's, a lot of what he does. And so the Impact Series has come as a result of like, I get, as you mentioned before, tons of people ask me for advice or like, hey, can we get coffee so I can pick your brain? It's like, I have such little time but I do really love the aspect of giving back. I always have, I'm pretty, open to, I get approached all the time from like high school students, college students who are, like I mentioned before, doing papers and whatever. And I really always try to make time for that kind of stuff. But, I don't have time to talk to every single person starting a business. So these Impact Series are, kind of a way to marry what he does and his, his style and approach of like getting people to open up, getting people to talk, getting people to see what their roadblocks are, what their blind spots are. He's brilliant at that. I obviously have like the real world experience of living those blind spots and roadblocks. So, Adrian has done lots of different seminars with his business partners. And that we did this like kind of, to see what it would be like, this thing in Austin a couple months ago with Jenny, who's the founder of Jenny's Ice Cream, who's a really good friend of mine. Adrian has coached her for a while. And we did this, Adrian and Jenny, and then his partner, Mark, did this kind of seminar in Austin a couple months ago. And it was great. And it was also people coming out of like COVID and being in a room together, which was awesome. And it's a small, very intimate group, only like 20 people, but it like gives him a chance to like coach people in almost in real time, but in a group setting. So you're learning, because honestly, we all have the same problems. So, scaling, growing, people, it's like everyone kind of, and so when you're hearing other people talk about the problems they have and the things that are going on with their business and how do you improve that. And so he's like, we're talking to different people one-on-one in a group setting. It's really powerful and you learn so much. And I was at that one, not for the entire thing, but it's so fun, first of all, to talk to people about these things. And I think that having gone through all the different things I've gone through with building Drybar, have obviously, loved to give back as much as I learned. So many people were so generous to me along the way so this impact series is truly meant to like leave an impact, motivate you to get back out there, figure out, like, discover things about yourself, your business that aren't maybe working well. So, I mean, I could go on, but that's like the gist of it. So we're excited, and we get to do it together, which is fun. And we don't agree on everything, as I'm sure you can imagine, and so I love it and he loves it too. And he asks me questions and I disagree with him a lot on things. And he's a very like, what's your vision? And I'm like, I don't fucking know, and so we have this like, it'll be a fun weekend. Yeah. It's enjoyable. And I really do love like how people get so much out of it. It's really rewarding for me.
Yeah. That group work can be so powerful.
Yeah. I mean, and I experienced that on a different level with this Onsite, which is now I'm on the board of Onsite, which is this amazing place I went to after my divorce when my life was like falling apart. And it's that kind of group therapy setting. And it is like, when you hear other people talk about their problems and you're like, oh, I can relate to that. And hearing it from a different perspective is very powerful, which is also part of why we love this idea.
Yeah, that was huge for me. I forgot how many years ago that was. In my own journey of processing shame and all sorts of other aspects of myself that just weren't helpful in terms of leadership and management, that so many people have the same problems or variations of the same issues, obviously depending upon one's upbringing and trauma and so many other things that can vary quite extensively. But yeah, I mean, what you said about business and personal being intertwined. Well, of course, we show up as messy humans to work. And so how could we not bring everything that makes...
But, I really was like, and obviously I think the pendulum swung so far for me, but I didn't want to show any of that stuff. I really was like, I want to appear like I have it all together. I have all the answers. I know exactly what I'm doing all the time. Like, that really was how I was operating, because like I didn't know any better or different,
Yeah.
And it really was like, I mean, I went through quite a life change and that softened me a lot. And I ended up having to do a lot of work on myself and all of that. And this like much softer version of myself appeared, which was like, hey, you don't have to know everything. You don't have to have all the answers. You can ask for help. You can be vulnerable. You can, and I was like, shit, that would have served me very well years ago, and more served me from like my own mental health and like anguish, to your point of like feeling like I had to be this certain way. And I was a bitch a lot, I would walk in the stores and I was mad. I was mad that things weren't the way I wanted it to be. And it was mad it wasn't exactly what I wanted. And I would make a lot of people kind of suffer. And there was I brought in a lot of pain, but now I would do differently.
Yeah, and that resonates. If I could go back and do things differently too, I would, like channeling my anger and frustration in healthier ways. I have to actively work on my own stuff behind the scenes in therapy or in a group setting or in coaching, and along with my other wellness practices, so that I'm not unconsciously working through my fears or my insecurities with work colleagues in a way or in ways that are dysfunctional or unconsciously hurtful. Though, having said that, in healthy work culture and relationships, there definitely needs to be time and place for vulnerability, but with appropriate boundaries, which is a skill that also requires that I'm actively considering in the moment why I'm sharing and with whom. For myself, that work is ongoing. If I don't do it, I've noticed historically there's an increase in likelihood that my action or my lack of action can potentially cause some form of pain, dysfunction, inefficiency, all of which is the last thing I want to be the cause of.
Yeah, it's almost unavoidable until we like see the light, which is also part of why, I like talking about this stuff, and I like that we're doing these seminars. It's just like people opening up about their stuff and feeling free is so awesome.
Mm-hmm.
I love it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you mentioned that historically you're an avoider. This concept of like, I don't need help, just push on through, like perfectionism kind of fueling so much of that, sprinkle in an unhealthy dose of imposter syndrome. And I love that story that you shared where, you were sitting in a boardroom and not feeling as though, or I could be projecting this incorrectly, but it seemed like you weren't confident to speak up. And so you were texting your brother during the meeting. And what was your experience of addressing imposter syndrome and moving through that?
Well, I think it goes to show like having good people around you who believe in you, who are in your corner, it goes a long way, for me, which is why I'm always big on partnerships. I'm sure I could do things by myself, but like even, in all of my businesses, I have partners, and not everybody agrees with that or feels that way. But, my brother being my brother, my biggest fan and supporter, he was very much, what was interesting, to backtrack a little, Michael and I worked together previously. We opened a couple of Nicole Miller boutiques back in South Florida where we grew up, and we were like going to kill each other, and it was not good. And we had always been really close, but that particular situation was really bad. And it was like very detrimental. So when we told my parents we were going to go into business with Drybar, my parents were like, what? Because it almost like, it felt like it almost ruined our relationship. So we had a very like, come to Jesus. This is how it has to be. The things that were bothersome to him and to me. But the beauty of Drybar was that I knew the hair business really well and he didn't. So it was like, Michael was always the overachiever, super smart. And he just is like, he's just one of those like naturally very smart people, like book smart, where I wasn't, And so when we were concepting Drybar and we were having these conversations, it was like, I brought things to the table that he didn't know. And so fast forward to like being a boardroom and Michael being the one to help me navigate through this stuff, his response to those texts were always like, that's a good question. You should ask it. And I was like, oh yeah, it is, And so little by little, the confidence that he gave me and really also the confidence that I felt like I got even from the board. I mean, I have to give a lot of credit to like, Jenna Gerwich, who was, who founded Laura Mercier Cosmetics. And for all the ladies listening, they definitely know that brand. I'm sure your wife does. That there was like, they also helped bring it out of me. And even like our partners at Sephora, when we were developing the product line, it was like a lot of people believed in me, they're like, it started to dawn on me like, oh, I had this really great idea. I brought in really smart people to help me execute it because I could not have done it by myself. Like I can't preface that enough. Cam, my ex-husband, the branding and the genius, that was a huge part of it. My brother and his business sense. And then like I had the hair, but like I could never have done it by myself. But all of these people around me from my brother to some of our board members to, our product partners and beyond, gave me the confidence to be like, oh, like, I may not be traditionally smart like these board members, and I didn't go to Stanford or Harvard, but I'm smart in my own way, in my own right. And once I really started, I feel like this sounds really hokey, but once I really started to believe that, it was like a very like opening moment for me of like, you know what? I am fucking smart. Like I can, I should say what I think.
Hell yeah.
And sometimes I still feel like I say this a lot. Like I am almost never the smartest person in the room. There's like stuff that I don't know that I should know about like the world. which is like always like a thing for me. And I have to often ask like what words mean. And I look up tons of words in the middle of conversations, but it's like, but I have my own genius, and that is my thing. And that's my superpower. And then, and I figure out the rest, which I think is the big takeaway here is like, figure out what you know, what you're good at, and then bring people in who don't have a different set of skills that you don't have. Then I think that was always probably my best, thing that I did was like surround myself with people who are smarter than me and know things that I don't.
And that's such a powerful center of gravity, because as you have and expand upon that confidence to bring in people who, as you said, are smarter than yourself, that's growth, that's learning, that's scaling.
Yeah.
The more that happens and the faster that happens, the better our company and team does. I think that's such a wonderful message you're sharing, because if managers are, for whatever reason, hesitant to hire people that push upon, challenge, expand the status quo, that can be stifling and dysfunctional for their teams and for the company as a whole.
And it's like a muscle, I think, because I will always want to be that person, but I do struggle, if being real, is like, I do struggle with the like, no, I know, my way is the best way. And this is the way we should do it. It still takes me, like, I still, to this day, it is like a tendency almost, I guess. It's like when I'm on a call and we're talking about something and I have an idea and I think this, and then, my partners will be like, well, I think we should, and I get like a fire in my belly being like, no, you don't know what? No. And then I'm like, oh, fuck, Alli, yes, listen to somebody else. It is. So I do think it's like, it's something, which is why I think it's important to always be growing and to always be like, for me, it's like listening to things that are inspiring, being humble, all of those things matter, because it is my natural. And I assume this is like a human tendency, is to be like, no, I'm right. You don't know what you're talking about, and I have to remind myself that's not true.
Yeah. I mean, it's probably baked into our DNA, evolutionarily speaking. You probably survived better if you were speaking in a particular way and welcomed by the tribe versus getting kind of kicked out of the cave to fend up with the saber-toothed tigers.
And it's like, it's vulnerable, right? You don't want to be like, oh, yeah, your idea is better. Like, nobody wants to say that. Like, our egos are very powerful, which is a lot of what I've learned from Adrian too. It's like this, like, it's okay to say you don't understand, or you're wrong, or I'm wrong, or this isn't, and that's just hard to do in all the aspects.
It's so hard, but that's what's so wonderful about having access to really talented coaches and therapists is you don't need to lose that fire. That fire is part of your genius. It's part of your inner voices that are constantly engaged in that creative friction to produce and to innovate and to make something that's worthwhile and of value. And what gets attenuated through that work, through the coaching and therapy, is how that information, how that energy gets processed. I'm sure you walked into Drybar, one of your shops, where you were channeling that anger and frustration in ways that maybe weren't so helpful. But I can tell by how you're speaking and how you're expressing some of these concepts that is highly likely not the case anymore.
Yeah, no, I mean, it hasn't been the case for a long time. And now a lot of it was like having tough conversations with John of like, and hearing, and from my brother too, and my brother being like, listen, when you walk in the shop and you're, and and everyone is excited to see you and talk to you. And then you're like annoyed and pissed off. It's not the right vibe. It's not the right look, and I struggled with that too, because I was like, I don't care. Like, it's my business and I want it to be a certain way. So what I learned eventually was that there are other ways to go about this. And I remember very specifically, I would, instead of just like unleashing on whoever was there, the manager, which was not the right person, I would walk out and I would stop what I was doing and I would make a list on my phone of all the things that weren't the way I wanted them to be, and where, suspend that stuff while I was in the shop. So I could have like a pleasant experience. Because, I'd walk in and I would talk to clients about the business. They were excited to meet me. They loved the concept. And then I would, talk to the stylist and talk to the receptionists or bartenders, as we call them. And, it was more of like putting, not to say that I couldn't, gently like be like, hey, like make suggestions, like in a very like friendly, subtle way. It definitely went a longer way to do that. And then to walk out of the store, I'd usually make a laundry list of the things that I didn't feel were right or were, that not the way they should be. And then I would sit down and tackle those things with John or whoever the right person was. And that was a much more effective way, frankly, to like make sure things get done and to put these like my concerns into more of a system. It's like we eventually created like, lack of a better word, like a Bible of all the things and how things should be. And like over time we developed that. And a lot of that came from like, nobody else is as critical of the shop as I am. And nobody else ever will be. I can walk into a shop and what seems like everything's running great and perfect. It's like, I can notice 100 things off the bat that are like, this is not how I want it to be. But I needed to help document that and to help us grow. And so, it was a lot of, my brother and John, who were the only people who weren't afraid of me to say, Alli, let's find a better way. And we, we eventually did, which is again, where a coach I think would have come in handy.
Definitely. Well, by you doing that effort and creating a more psychologically safe environment, I suspect more people feel as though it's safe to take a risk and to point out things to you that may either be helpful to know or critical for you to know.
Yeah. And I think I realized also years into it that I didn't want to be the kind of founder or person that created an environment of people around me who were afraid to tell me the truth, who were afraid because I might lose my shit, and I was that person. And I do remember that, I remember this like, which I nipped in the bud pretty quickly, but this like, hey, let's try to keep this from her because we'll just fix it and whatever, and we'll figure it out. I'm like, no, I want to know. Like, I want to know things that aren't working. I want to know things that people are complaining about. I don't want to be on the outside. I want to be on the inside. I want to know what's not working. But there was this like, oh shit, if we tell her, she's going to like lose her shit. So I had to dispel that, and I had to change to make sure that I no longer created an environment where people were afraid to speak up. I didn't want people to be afraid of me or what I would do or how I would react. Like, there's like nothing worse than that, and that took me a little while to figure out.
Right. Healthy leadership, healthy management, to create a culture that is psychologically safe, where people feel it's safe to take an interpersonal risk. In my experience, first has to start with one's own self-management and doing whatever it takes to be within the never-ending process of growing one's awareness, practicing curiosity, nurturing kindness, which, by the way, those are our 3 core values. And each of those have 3 key behaviors that support them. And anyone who is doing that inner work knows that can take a while to start to meaningfully excavate one's own stuff, while also in parallel working with people on a team to mutually create the conditions for the team to function in healthy ways. I mean, it has taken us a number of years to start to operationalize this way of being together, and we still have a very long way to go. But I'm excited and grateful for the work that we're doing and how far we've come, especially over the last few years. So that leads me to wonder, how do you think about operationalizing for a desired culture? Like, take new hires, for example. When someone new joins the team, are they brought through some kind of experience that reinforces the wish that you just expressed, that it's okay and ultimately better for the team and organization to speak up?
Well, I mean, there's definitely, I think it's more of a cultural thing, and something that like we adopted, I would say, in like around year 4 or 5, where it's like giving people outlets to talk. And my sister-in-law, Sarah, who is married to my brother, obviously, her role and her title was kind of like that. And I think at one point it was like spirit director, and then it evolved to like director of director of experience, I think. But basically, like, her job in a nutshell was to like go into the shops, talk to the stylists, talk to the managers, just about like how they're feeling, you know?
Nice.
I mean, for me, it was harder because I was a different, like, it was a different, I couldn't, they wanted to tell me, again, back to what I was saying, they wanted to tell me like all the good stuff and whatever. And sometimes the bad stuff too. But, you know, Sarah was more removed, that it was easier for them to like open up to her, you know? And so that mentality of like what she would do and what we really tried to empower our managers with was like, yeah, like we want to hear the good, bad, and the ugly, like speak up, tell us, you know, what's going on. Cause, you know, it's the only way we can improve. And, you know, we had this mentality of like, we want, of course, the customers to be happy and have a great experience, but that doesn't work if the people working for us aren't happy and having a great experience. So it was like,
100%.
what are the things that make you guys, you know, is it having, you know, earning more money on commission, or is it a paid day off, or is it just, you know, we always made sure we had snacks in the shop? What are the things? Do you want to be on set with me? Like, what are the things that are motivating to you? So those kinds of conversations, and having that kind of culture of like, oh, we can speak up and we want to speak up. And whenever I would do, like, I don't do them anymore, but I used to do these like new hire orientations for probably like the first 50 stores. And that was one of the things I always talked about with, and usually it was a group of like 70 or 80 stylists. And I would say, like I said to you, like, we want, of course, this is like a very customer service centric business. And it's really important that the customers feel really well taken care of. And that is huge. And that is what makes or breaks a business. It's equally as important that you feel really taken care of. So if you're having a problem, so we would always empower, like, if you're having a problem with your manager, there's a person above your manager that you can talk to. Not that we want to mess with the chain of, I don't like the word chain of command, but, you know, if you have a manager, that's who you should speak to when you're having a problem. But if you're having a problem with your manager, shit, what do you do then? Well, but you can email me, you know, if like push comes to shove, and there's all these other people that you can reach out to if things aren't going well, because, you know, at least come to us with a problem and allow us to try to fix it. Maybe it's not a fixable problem, and maybe Drybar is not the right fit for you. That happens too. But just as the same way we want to fix customer problems, we want to fix internal problems too. So that kind of like open door policy of like, let's be fully transparent, I think helps create, you know, that whole environment and that culture that's so important.
Oh, it's critical. If you can't have those transparent, authentic conversations, and also a mechanism, like you said, another way that we like to think of it is in terms of constructive escalation, like two people agreeing that we disagreed on this, so I'm just letting you know that I'm going to go to your boss. Would you like to come with me? And so you give you give the person the opportunity to be part of that conversation.
And I think that's something I've also, you know, this like radical transparency, you know, I love that. And, you know, I think that I didn't grow up, or I didn't think about that. And I think that's something that I really also learned along the way too, definitely from Adrian too. Like, let's just all talk about it. Like, let's bring it all out, you know? And then I think that is the healthiest way to do it, 100%.
Right. And everyone's going to have their own definition of transparency. So to have a conversation about transparency, what does transparency mean? It's all about, you know, seeking clarity, generating clarity.
Yeah.
So you have a second book that you're writing.
I am.
I guess one, how's it coming? And two, is there something that's just key that you're itching to express that you haven't expressed, or that you want the world to know about you?
You know, I don't know if there's like one thing that I'm dying to express. I think that what's really therapeutic about this book, you know, my first book was very much like, you know, more about hair and hair focus. And this is more of like a real internal, here's my story, and here's how I did it. And I think that is, I think it goes to what we were talking about earlier, that like, there's this like, I hope that the book will serve as like, if I did it, you can do it, and anybody can do it kind of feel, which is very, you know, which is a lot of like, my parents wanted me to marry really well, like all that shit that I, when I was a kid, because it was like, who knew where I was going to end up in this, like, you can figure it out, and who knows where your life's going to lead. So there's a piece of that, and then there's like, oh, this is what it really felt like to build a business, and the a lot of what we're talking about, the ups and the downs, and what I learned, and the story, and then there's a lot of it that's very personal, like working with my husband, and then divorcing my husband, and then having kids who had to deal with the fallout of that, and then like restarting my life at 40 something years old, and picking back up, and what all that looks like. So it's a really like personal book. I mean, and it's so early. I basically have spent, I can't believe it was like, it took a year, but I mean, it's like, it was a year of like, it's just, 19 chapters of like summaries, so I'll probably spend the next like 6 months or so really like, honing in on each chapter. It's very, man, it was so like taxing, wearing on such an energy suck to do it, which I guess a lot of people feel, man, going back through all of that stuff of like, from when I was young to Drybar, and remembering it all. But I think it's, my hope anyways, is that it'll be something that'll serve a lot of different people, going through all sorts of different stuff, like I did, like
nice.
I do.
Nice. I'm sure it will. Okay. So as we're winding down here, I want to make sure we get in 3 businesses that you're involved in. Okay Humans, which is about therapy, Squeeze, massage, and Becket and Quill. Go.
Jewelry. Squeeze was the first kind of new business after Drybar. And that was something that Michael and I were really excited about, because we just felt like Drybar, there was this hole in the market. There was like your spa where you're spending $300 for a massage, or there was like the discount chain, which is like hit or miss, and the experience is off. We just felt like there was an opportunity to create something better at a good price point, but a great experience, which is largely, what we did with Drybar. And I think the big differentiator of Squeeze also is the app. You book on the app, you tip on the app, everything happens through the app. So it's like the Uber Postmates of massage, mixed in with the same founding team of Drybar.
Yeah, I would definitely use that.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, it's really a fantastic, I just went this weekend, and I was like, oh, God, I love this place. And because then we have these like the little button under the bed that once you're like snug in your bed, you push it, and there's a light that tells the therapist you're ready. I mean, there's just all the things we thought of. It's just, and
all the things that you're just annoyed with, like you've solved for.
Yes. I mean, that is exactly like what we do, is like, what is annoying about massage? Oh, a lot of things. Let's change all that. That's kind of how Squeeze came to be. It's a completely franchised model. So we started the first one in Studio City. Brittany Driscoll, who's our co-founder and CEO, she's on the move right now. She lives in Nashville. She moved there, and we have a bunch more announcements coming of new Squeeze locations opening. So that's exciting. And it's a great like turnkey opportunity for, potential, want to be entrepreneurs. Like, I just want something that's like ready and baked. And it's a really great business. So there's that. And then Okay Humans is such a great story because it came along when I was really in the throes of my depression, and I was going to tons of therapy. And Christy Desai, who's our co-founder on that, I happened to run into her literally on the street when I was walking out of Squeeze. You can't script this.
That's
and she was
story.
Like, I've been DMing you, and I've been wanting to get in touch with you. And I have this idea to create this like therapy concept that's like Drybar, where it's like, creating this like place where it's like right now, the one location we have is in Brentwood, across from Drybar, and next to like Susie Cake. So the idea of this was like, we weren't reinventing the wheel. It's therapy, as therapy, but now you don't need to go into like a weird medical office. It's like kind of like making it more normal and taking away the stigma. And, again, I think people have been going to therapy for a long, long time. We just created a really beautiful environment around it and experience, which is kind of what we do, So that's also has a big tech component to it. You can book online, you can see the therapist online. And then the last thing,
you can see their bios, their little bio videos, which are cool.
Yeah, you can see their bios, you can talk to them. It's all very, there's a big tech aspect to it too, but you go in person which I think is best. So that's really exciting. And we will be franchising that too. And then the last thing is jewelry, which I feel like, some people think is an interesting departure for me, but it's just always been like a passion of mine that kind of falls in like the lifestyle fashion-y part of me. As like, I came across this woman, Meredith Quill, who was operating her own business, and it was pretty small, but she was like, doing pretty well. And she figured out a way to like make jewelry that looked and felt high end, but didn't have the high end price tag. And I was like, this is great, but needs a new brand and needs a new website and needs like needs to be elevated a bit. So I came in and invested in it, and we became partners. And I just really love jewelry. And it is that kind of thing where it's like a quick pick me up. And our price point is such that it can be that thing that you just, you pick up a $200 necklace and are really excited about it, and you didn't just spend $2,000 on it, and it will last you. And then you can buy another necklace in a couple months, So that's a bit fun business, and it's direct to consumer mostly right now. And I'm trying to figure out how to make that work, which is challenging because I know brick and mortar much better. But I'm enjoying the challenge, and it's going pretty well.
Nice.
And there's more coming, but I'll leave it at that.
Is there one in particular that's coming that you want to mention?
Nothing that I can talk about, but there's some other stuff in the works.
Okay.
It's like just serial entrepreneur for sure.
You can't help it. So how do you, given all that you have going on, both in your professional and personal life, seeing you are vibrant, you have a ton of energy, very well adapted to the high activity life that you have. How do you take care of yourself? Like, what are your self-care non-negotiables that you need to do either every day or throughout the week?
Well, that really evolved for me, because I would say in the early days of Drybar, I did not take care of myself. And I think that was, honestly part of like probably a lot of why I ended up getting divorced. And, I was very like Drybar. And then it was like my kids, Drybar kids.
Something's got to give.
Something's got to give. And at some point in the Drybar years, I was like, oh, I don't have to be in the office at 9:00. I can go work out or do whatever I need to do. And I started to give myself permission. It took me a long time, but because I was like, I felt like I always had to be in the office by 9:00. I had this weird, which I didn't, and you don't. That's the beauty of being an entrepreneur is you can make your own rules. And now I've taken that really far. And I make my own schedule. I don't take a meeting or a call before 10:00 ever, because I usually go and work out, get my kids out the door to school. I usually take an 8:30 workout class most days, and then I'm done by 9:30. And sometimes I'll take a call because I can walk to where I work out, which I love about where I live. I walk everywhere. And on my walk home, I will take a 9:30 call sometimes. But that is like a boundary for me. Like that is important to me. I want to be able to get up with my kids in the morning and be there for them and do all of that. I like to walk my dogs in the morning. That's like walking is like a mental release for me, and working out in the morning. And I get lots of facials. I go and get massages a lot. I do acupuncture, and I do these things pretty regularly, probably like, I don't know, more than most people are not, but I make sure those are things. I literally, right before I got on this with you today, I was talking to Adrian about, I was like, I just, cause we were trying to schedule something, and I like had a facial, and I was like, I'm not doing my facial because like I'm 46 years old. 40. How old am I? I'm going to be 47. So I'm 46. Wow. And I was like, I need to do this stuff. I mean, part mentally because I need to feel this way, and part because, it's like, it's important as I age, like to take care of myself. And that is, those are non-negotiables for me. So I make sure like that stuff, I am doing that stuff. And I know that I'm lucky that I have the opportunity. I have the resources to do it. I have the time to do it. But I think I've earned it.
You most certainly have earned it. Thank you, Alli.
Yeah, this is fun. Great questions.
Thank you. I had a lot of fun with you too.
Awesome.
Thank you to our entire team behind the scenes at Glow. I'm so grateful for your care and commitment to serving our members around the world. Thank you to our teachers for so beautifully sharing your gifts and talents. I'm also grateful to our lovely community of Glow members. You've supported us since 2008, and because of you, we get to continue to do the work we love. It's the combined support of our team, our teachers, and our community that grants me the privilege to continue to bring you the Glow podcast. Thank you to Lee Schneider at Red Cub Agency for production support, and the beautiful music you're hearing now is by Carrie Rodriguez and her husband Luke Jacobs. And remember, take care of yourself because our world needs you. Thank you for coming on this journey with me. You can find the Glow podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or glo.com/podcast, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. I'm Derik Mills.